A mother accused of abducting and hiding her own daughter after losing custody is speaking out this morning.
More breaking news now. An update on the case of the girl found safe after being missing for more than 2 years.
On July 13, 2019, in a quiet village on the outskirts of Ithaca, New York, a 4-year-old girl named Paisley Schultis was supposed to begin the next chapter of her life. A court had already decided where she was going. A legal guardian was waiting for her. Her older sister had already been collected from school earlier that same afternoon, picked up with a police escort, and delivered safely into her grandmother's arms. All that was left was to go back to the house, knock on the door, and get Paisley. But when authorities arrived, the house was empty. Not the kind of empty where someone stepped out for groceries and forgot to leave a note. Empty the way a house gets when the people inside knew you were coming. Empty the way a table looks when someone has already cleared it. Chairs pushed in, nothing left behind. Just a silence where a 4-year-old girl had been, and the slow, sickening realization that something had gone terribly wrong. Paisley Schultis was formally reported missing 2 days later. And then she disappeared into the kind of darkness that is hardest to find a child in. Not a stranger's darkness, not the darkness of someone unknown, but the darkness built by her own family, board by board, lie by lie, right under a staircase in upstate New York. She would not be found for 2 years, 6 months, and 1 day. And when she was finally found, the image would stop the country cold. A 6-year-old girl, a makeshift hiding space barely big enough for a body, a pair of little feet peeking out from behind a wooden staircase, while officers who had walked those same stairs a dozen times before finally took one more look. This is the story of Paisley Schultis, the girl who was right there, the girl nobody was allowed to find. Before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one, and this community never stops amazing me. Now, let's get into it. To understand how a child can vanish, not into a stranger's car, not across state lines, not into some faceless criminal network, but into a hollow space beneath a staircase in a home that police visited nearly a dozen times, you have to understand where Paisley Schultis came from. And you have to understand a town. Saugerties, New York, is the kind of place that looks like a postcard of itself. It sits on the western bank of the Hudson River, about 100 miles north of New York City, tucked between the Catskill Mountains and the water. The downtown is small and charming. Antique shops, a lighthouse you can walk to at low tide, old colonial-era buildings that have been repurposed into art galleries and cafes. On paper, it is a picturesque Hudson Valley enclave, the kind of town where everybody knows everybody, where families put down roots that go back centuries, and where the rhythms of life feel slow and unhurried. The Schultis family had roots in Saugerties, going back to the 1700s. The local town historian, Audrey Klinkenberg, recognized the surname immediately when the case broke. According to her research, the Schultis family is even connected to the founding families of nearby Woodstock, the same Woodstock that became synonymous with the 1969 music festival, the same one that draws artists and bohemians to this day. The name meant something in that valley. It carried history, and in the winter of 2022, it would become one of the most discussed names in American true crime. But before we get there, we need to go back, all the way back to a little girl named Paisley and the family that fractured around her. Paisley Joanne Schultis was born into a life that was already complicated. Her biological parents, Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Schultis Jr., had already suffered the kind of loss that reshapes a person. Before Paisley's birth, the couple had lost 2 daughters in infancy. The grief of that, the particular unimaginable grief of losing not 1 but 2 children, is something that no outside observer can fully account for. It does not excuse what came later, but it is part of the picture, and any honest telling of this story has to include it. By 2019, Paisley and her older sister were living with their parents in Cayuga Heights, a village on the outskirts of Ithaca in Tompkins County, about 160 miles west of Saugerties. The details of what happened inside that home are largely sealed by the privacy protections that apply to child custody proceedings. But the broad outlines are not in dispute. A babysitter came forward with concerns about the children's welfare in the home. Court documents that later surfaced suggested the parents had been taking the children to work at construction job sites until close to midnight because they could not afford childcare. Kirk Schultis Jr. had also faced serious legal trouble. He was later arrested in North Carolina on charges of possession of methamphetamine and heroin, eventually pleading down to a lesser drug paraphernalia charge and spending 8 days in jail. He had also faced fraud charges in Pennsylvania. There was a pattern, documented and adjudicated, that the family court system had responded to. In 2019, a New York family court made its decision. Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Schultis Jr. were found unfit to maintain custody of their daughters. The girls were placed with their maternal grandmother as legal guardian. The specific legal findings were never detailed publicly, but the court's conclusion was unambiguous. These children needed to be somewhere else. What happened next is the moment this story pivots from a custody dispute into something far more serious. The plan on July 13, 2019, was simple. Paisley's older sister was at school. Her grandmother, now the court-appointed legal guardian for both children, went to pick her up, accompanied by a social worker and a police escort. That is how these transfers work when there is conflict. You don't go alone. You bring support. You make it official. The older girl was collected, safe, secured. One child accounted for. Then the team headed to the biological parents' home for Paisley. Empty. Gone. In the early days of the investigation, Kirk Schultis Jr. told authorities that Kimberly Cooper had taken the child out of state. He pointed police toward Philadelphia. It was a deflection, and as police would later learn, a calculated one. Because what investigators strongly suspected almost immediately was something far simpler and far more audacious. That Paisley had not been taken out of state at all. That she was still in New York. That she was somewhere close. Specifically, police believed she was in Saugerties, at the home of Kirk Schultis Sr., Paisley's paternal grandfather, the senior patriarch of the Schultis family, who lived at 35 Fawn Road. Paisley was formally reported missing on July 13, 2019. She was 4 years old. The missing persons flyer that circulated showed a little girl with dark hair and clear eyes, the kind of photo that stops you when you scroll past it, that makes you look twice and think, someone knows where she is. And the infuriating truth is, many people did. What followed over the next 2 years and more is one of the most maddening chapters of this story, because this was not a cold case in the traditional sense. The police did not hit a dead end and run out of leads. They were not searching blindly in the dark. They knew where to look. Over a period of more than 2 years, Saugerties police received tip after tip pointing to 35 Fawn Road on Saugerties. Officers went to that address again and again. Police Chief Joseph Sinagra would later confirm to reporters that his department had been to the home nearly a dozen times. Sometimes they were met at the door. Sometimes they were met with outright hostility, the residents accusing police of harassment, of badgering, of wasting their time when they should be out looking for Paisley elsewhere. The bitter irony of that accusation, given what they were actively concealing, is difficult to put into words. On a handful of occasions, officers were allowed limited access inside the house. They looked around. They saw what they were permitted to see. But there were rooms they could not enter, the bedroom areas, the basement, without probable cause or a warrant. And without concrete, corroborated evidence of the child's presence inside, they could not compel entry. This is the knife's edge that law enforcement walks in cases like this. The Fourth Amendment protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures. That protection is essential, It is foundational to what this country claims to be. But it is also, in certain cases, the wall between a missing child and the officers trying to find her. You cannot kick in doors based on suspicion alone. You cannot tear apart a house because you believe, even when you have good reason to believe, that a child is hidden somewhere inside. So they kept coming back. They kept asking. They kept receiving the same answer. I don't know where she is. I haven't seen her since 2019. You're wasting your time. And all the while, police would later learn Paisley Schultis was living in that very house. The police chief described what they found during the eventual search: a bedroom with Paisley's name written on the wall. A bed that appeared to have been recently slept in. An area of the basement that resembled a small apartment. Evidence of a child's life, built quietly and hidden in plain sight, in the gaps between the visits from officers who were not permitted to see far enough inside to find it. She was there. For over 2 years, she was there. And when police came, as they did, again and again, working leads and following tips, Paisley Schultis went under the stairs. Think about what that means. Think about a 4-year-old child, then a 5-year-old, then a 6-year-old, being told to hide, being kept so still, so quiet, so trained to silence that even when officers were directly above her, their footsteps on the stairs, their voices in the hallway, their presence filling the house, she did not make a sound. Police Chief Sinagra put it plainly when he spoke to reporters afterward. He said it was quite possible that on the night she was finally found, Paisley and her mother had been in that space for nearly 5 hours before officers dismantled the stairs and reached them. 5 hours. A 6-year-old child, still and silent while strangers walked overhead. That is not the behavior of a happy child on a normal evening. That is the behavior of a child who had been taught, in the most deliberate and methodical way possible, that staying invisible was the price of staying with her mother. February 14, 2022, Valentine's Day. A new tip arrived. But this one was different. This one was specific, detailed, corroborated. The kind of tip that gives investigators something solid enough to bring to a judge and say, we need to go back. And this time, we need to get inside. Saugerties police obtained a search warrant. They assembled a team that included officers from the New York State Police Bureau of Criminal Investigation and uniformed troopers. And that evening, they went back to 35 Fawn Road for the last time. Kirk Schultis Sr. answered. He was, as always, adamant. He had not seen Paisley since she was reported missing in 2019. He did not know where she was. He could not help them. Police entered anyway. They searched the house room by room, the bedroom areas, the living spaces, and eventually, they made their way to the basement. The basement of 35 Fawn Road was accessed by a wooden staircase. Thaddeus had walked past it, on it, around it. It was simply a staircase, a functional, unremarkable feature of the house, except that Detective Eric Thiele was not satisfied with ordinary. About an hour and a half into the search, Detective Thiele stood at the bottom of that staircase and looked at it differently. He could not have told you exactly why. Police Chief Sinagra would later describe it in terms that are both prosaic and haunting. He just couldn't put his finger on it, but there was something about the staircase that bothered him. Something in the construction, something in the way the wood met the risers, something that didn't sit right. He reached for his flashlight and pointed it at the gap where one step met the riser beside it. He peered into the dark. He saw what he thought was a blanket. What happened next took minutes. Officers used a Halligan tool, the kind of heavy-duty prying device that firefighters use to force open doors, and began removing boards. Treads and risers came off the stringers of the stairway one by one. The space behind them began to open up, and then they saw them. Feet, small feet. The police chief's words, little feet, beneath the staircase, in a space that was dark and cold and damp, described by police as small, cold, and wet, was a makeshift enclosure. It had been set up with pillows and blankets and clothes. It was the kind of space you build for survival, not for comfort. The kind of space that tells you everything you need to know about the desperation of the people who built it. Inside that space, huddled together in the dark, were Paisley Schultis and her mother, Kimberly Cooper. Paisley was 6 years old. She had been missing for 2 years, 6 months and 1 day. She was alive. Paramedics examined Paisley immediately. The physical news was, by some measure, a relief. She was determined to be in good health. No signs of physical abuse. Her body, at least, had been cared for. But what emerged in the hours and days that followed the discovery told a different and more complicated story about what the preceding 2.5 years had cost her. Paisley could not read. She could not write. Police Chief Sinagra said it plainly in a press conference. She had not attended school since her disappearance, and she had not been educated at home. There was no homeschooling in place. For 2.5 years, the years between 4 and 6, the years when children learn what letters look like, how to write their names, how to count and read, and begin to understand the world, Paisley had been hidden. While other children sat in classrooms and learned to spell and draw and raise their hands, Paisley Schultis was under a staircase, learning how to be invisible. She had also not seen a doctor in all that time. No medical checkups, no developmental screenings, no routine care. Just a child, kept apart from the world that was supposed to be hers. Paisley was reunited with her grandmother and her older sister. She was safe, but the road ahead of her was going to be long, because what had been done to her during those hidden years could not simply be undone by a car ride and a reunion. Police Chief Sinagra spoke about it in a way that lingered. He did not shy away from the moral clarity of what he was saying, even while acknowledging the grief behind it. "I understand as a parent," he said. "No one wants to lose custody of their children. But sometimes, the right thing for us to do for our children is the hardest thing to do for our children." What they should have done in 2019, when custody was granted to a third party, was relinquish the child rather than run and hide. And then he added something that carried its own particular weight. Depending on what the reason was why Paisley and her sister were removed from their mother and father's custody, that may have been rectified by now. Whatever that deficiency was, may have been corrected, and those parents may have had full custody of their children today. But this is going to be a major setback for them. In other words, the choices that Kimberly Cooper and Kirk Schultis Jr. made in 2019, the choice to run, to hide, to tell police lie after lie after lie, may have cost them the very outcome they claimed to be fighting for. If they had complied, they might, in time, have gotten their children back through the proper legal channels. Instead, they gambled everything on a hidden room under a staircase, and a 6-year-old girl paid the price. 3 people were arrested in connection with Paisley's disappearance. Kimberly Cooper, Paisley's mother, was charged with second-degree custodial interference and endangering the welfare of a child. When police found her that Valentine's Day evening, she was already wanted on an active warrant issued by Ulster County Family Court. She was arraigned in Saugerties and then taken to Ulster County Jail. Kirk Schultis Jr., Paisley's father, was charged with first-degree custodial interference, a felony, and with endangering the welfare of a child, a misdemeanor. He was arraigned and released on his own recognizance. Kirk Schultis Sr., the grandfather, the man who owned the house, the man who had told police a dozen times that he had not seen Paisley since she went missing, was charged with the same felony and misdemeanor as his son. He, too, was released on his own recognizance. All 3 initially pleaded not guilty. The defense, from the very beginning, took a particular shape. Lawyers for the defendants did not dispute that Paisley had been found under the stairs. They could not dispute that. The photographs police released, showing the makeshift enclosure, The cramped, dark space where a child and her mother had been hiding were already public. Instead, the defense pivoted to the why. Ann Weaver, the attorney for Kirk Schultis Jr., issued a statement asserting that her client had been fighting for his children for the past 2.5 years in family court and had never relinquished custody of his children in the first place. She called the charge of custodial interference ludicrous. Carol Morgan, representing Kimberly Cooper, went further. Her statement painted a portrait of a mother driven entirely by love. "The first thing you need to understand," it read, "is that this is a story about parents. A mommy who loves her child so fiercely and deeply that she would go to the ends of the earth to protect her. There were no dark places in this child's life. Please understand that the system that we rely on simply got it wrong. There was no crime committed here." The grandfather's attorney, Marianne Connolly, asked the public to reserve judgment until all the facts were in, saying, "This is a family. They love their children." It is worth pausing on those statements, because the defense's argument essentially came down to this: the system was wrong, the parents were right, and what happened under that staircase, however it looked, was an act of love. The photographs of that enclosure tell their own story. Dark, cold, wet, no windows, no natural light. A space where a child spent years learning to be still and silent when police came to the door. One can hold, simultaneously, the truth that Kimberly Cooper loved her daughter and the truth that what she chose to do with that love caused Paisley Schultis harm that will take years to untangle. Those two things are not mutually exclusive. They just don't make the story any easier to sit with. One detail from that night's search has always stood out, and it speaks to the entire scope of what was happening in that house. When investigators searched the bedroom areas, the same areas that, during previous visits, they had been denied entry to, they found a room with Paisley's name written directly on the wall, and a bed that appeared to have been recently slept in. They said the room had set up the space for Paisley in the event she ever returned, but of course, she had never left. And that room, with her name on the wall and her bed freshly used, tells you something that no statement from any attorney could fully walk back. She was not a hidden secret in that house. She was a presence, a child with a named room, with a life being lived inside those walls, a child being raised, in whatever fashion, inside a home whose adult occupants stood on the porch and told investigators, again and again, that they had no idea where she was. The grandfather's own statement on the night of the search followed the same script he had used for 2 years. He said he had not seen Paisley since she went missing. He did not know where she was. Police were dismantling his staircase while he said it. There is something clarifying about that moment, about the sheer, unblinking audacity of maintaining a lie at the very instant it is being disproven. Kirk Schultis Sr. had allowed his granddaughter to live in his home for more than 2 years. He had watched police come and go. He had told them to their faces that he could not help them. And on the night they finally had a warrant and were taking his house apart board by board, he was still, apparently, insisting he knew nothing. It was a performance that collapsed the moment those little feet appeared in the beam of Detective Teeley's flashlight. But it had been running for over 2 years. There is a question that surfaces in any story like this, and it needs to be addressed directly because it matters, and because it is genuinely complicated. How does this happen? How does law enforcement know, with considerable confidence, that a missing child is inside a specific house, and not be able to get to her for more than 2 years? The answer is the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, which protects citizens from unreasonable searches and seizures. To conduct a search of a home, law enforcement generally needs either consent from the residents or a search warrant issued by a judge. To get a warrant, they need to demonstrate probable cause, a legal standard that requires more than suspicion, more than tips, more than the gut feeling of experienced investigators who have been to the same address a dozen times and keep coming away with nothing. This is not a bureaucratic technicality. The Fourth Amendment exists precisely because history is full of governments that use the power to search homes as a weapon, against political opponents, against minorities, against anyone deemed inconvenient. The protection it provides is foundational. You cannot simply wish it away because the outcome in a specific case would be more satisfying if police could enter anywhere they suspected a child might be hidden. But the Paisley Schultis case illustrates, in unusually sharp relief, the cost that protection can carry in certain circumstances. A family with deep roots in Saugerties, living in a house on a quiet road, played the system expertly. They denied access. They accused officers of harassment. They maintained their story with almost mechanical consistency across years of repeated questioning. And because they controlled the threshold of their own home, and because the law respected that threshold, a small girl stayed hidden inside it for 2 years and 7 months. It was only when a fresh, specific, corroborated tip gave investigators enough to bring before a judge, only when they had the legal architecture to compel entry, that everything changed. And even then, it came down to one detective and a flashlight, and an instinct that something was not right about a wooden staircase. In the months that followed Paisley's discovery, the legal proceedings took shape. And then, as legal proceedings in cases like this often do, they took unexpected turns. Kimberly Cooper's criminal case moved toward a resolution that surprised many who had followed the story closely. In July 2023, her attorney announced that charges against her had been adjourned in contemplation of dismissal, a legal arrangement common in New York State, in which charges are set aside with the understanding that they will be dismissed if the defendant stays out of legal trouble for a period of time. Under the terms of the agreement, charges against Cooper would be dismissed if she remained out of trouble for 1 year. Her attorney noted that, per the agreement, custody of Paisley had been returned to her mother. Let that land for a moment. The woman who was found hiding with her daughter under a staircase, who had been the subject of a 2.5-year missing persons search, who had helped deprive her child of schooling and medical care and the basic components of a normal childhood, would not face criminal conviction, provided she stayed clean. And the little girl at the center of the entire case would be returned to her care. Cooper's attorney released a statement in the wake of the custody update, saying that Paisley and her older sister were together with their mother. The attorney also pushed back on some of the early reporting about the case, arguing that descriptions of a secret room had been overblown. The photographs police released of that enclosure remain in the public record. They show what they show. Kirk Schultis Jr.'s story, meanwhile, took its own dark turn. In December 2022, just months after Paisley's rescue, he was arrested by New York State Police and charged with criminal impersonation after giving a fake name during a traffic stop on Route 32 in Saugerties. In April 2024, with a jury about to be selected in that case, Schultis Jr. pleaded guilty to second-degree burglary, admitting to his role in a burglary at a Saugerties home that had taken place in September 2022, just months after his daughter was found. The district attorney's office noted that crimes like the one Schultis committed had the effect of degrading a community's sense of security. As of the latest reporting available, the original custodial interference and child endangerment charges related to Paisley's disappearance remained part of his broader legal picture, though their final resolution had not been publicly confirmed. Kirk Schultis Sr., the grandfather, similarly faced ongoing proceedings, with no public final judgment confirmed at the time of this writing. All 3 defendants are presumed innocent of any charges that have not been adjudicated, per the foundational requirements of due process. What is beyond dispute is what the record shows happened to Paisley Schultis. A court found her parents unfit in 2019. They refused to comply with that ruling. They hid her in a house for 2.5 years, and she emerged unable to read or write, having missed the years of her life when those things are learned. Whatever any court ultimately decides about the legal guilt of the adults involved, the harm that was done to that child is not in question. It would be easy, in a story this dark, to lose sight of the human beings who got it right. Detective Eric Thiele is not a household name. He was not featured in a documentary. He did not give a long press conference or write a book. He was simply a detective doing his job on a cold Valentine's Day evening in Saugerties, New York, walking through a house he had probably not expected to yield much, and then stopping at a staircase because something about it didn't sit right. That instinct, that indefinable professional unease that makes a good officer look twice at something everyone else has already walked past, is what found Paisley Schultis. Police Chief Sinagra's description of that moment is one of the most striking details in this entire story. He told CNN that Detective Thiele couldn't put his finger on what was bothering him. He just knew something was off. He shone his flashlight into the gap where a step met a riser and saw what looked like fabric. And then he called for a Halligan tool and started pulling wood off the frame of a staircase, while a grandfather stood somewhere behind him, still insisting, presumably, that nobody was there. Police had walked those stairs before. On previous visits, the limited access visits where officers were allowed into parts of the house but not others, someone had walked up and down those steps, maybe multiple times, and seen nothing remarkable. On the night of February 14, 2022, one detective looked more carefully. And that was the difference between Paisley Schultis spending another night under a staircase and Paisley Schultis going home. There is a lesson in that, beyond the details of this particular case. It is a lesson about persistence and attention and the value of not accepting the surface of things at face value, especially when the surface has been deliberately arranged to discourage further looking. Let us spend a moment with what the world outside that staircase was like while Paisley was in it. When Paisley was taken in July 2019, she was 4 years old. She was in the pre-kindergarten phase of childhood, a time of playgrounds and picture books and learning the alphabet, a time when children are supposed to be learning to socialize, to follow simple rules, to exist in groups of other children, to begin building the scaffolding of who they will become. Instead, she spent the next 2.5 years hidden. She did not go to school. There was no kindergarten, no first grade, no teacher who knew her name. While the children in her age group were learning to read, sounding out words, tracing letters with fat pencils, feeling the first dizzy satisfaction of a sentence that makes sense, Paisley was somewhere else entirely. She learned other things. She learned stillness. She learned silence. She learned that when certain sounds happened, when a car pulled up, when voices approached the door, it was time to move, quickly and quietly, to a particular place under the stairs and stay there, motionless and soundless, for however long it took. She did not see a doctor. She did not get vaccinations or checkups or the routine monitoring that allows adults to spot problems in children before they become serious. She existed in a medical silence that by some small miracle did not result in a physical health crisis, but which represents a years-long gap in the kind of care that every child deserves as a baseline. She was 6 years old when they found her. She could not read or write. She had no experience of school, of friends her own age, of the normal social world of childhood. She had an enormous amount of catching up to do, and she would have to do it in the aftermath of an experience that would have been confusing and disorienting even for an adult. Because here is the thing that the surface narrative of this story can sometimes obscure. Kimberly Cooper was Paisley's mother. Whatever the courts had decided, whatever the circumstances of the custody change, Paisley had been with her mother. That relationship, complicated and legally problematic as it was real to the child at the center of it. The reunion with her grandmother and her sister was a rescue. But rescues are also, sometimes, a kind of grief. And a 6-year-old girl who had spent 2.5 years in hiding with her mother cannot simply step into a new situation and feel nothing about leaving that behind. The emotional landscape that Paisley would have needed to navigate in the weeks and months and years after her recovery is something that deserves acknowledgement. She was not just a missing child found and restored to safety. She was a child who had been shaped, profoundly, by the years she spent hidden, and who would need time, care, and extraordinary support to build a life from what she had been given. She deserved that support. She deserved every resource the world could offer, and she deserved, above all, a childhood, the one that had already been partly stolen from her, to begin, however late, to unfold. Paisley Schultis was found. That is the fact that distinguishes this case from the tragedies that don't resolve themselves, from the cases where a child goes missing and never comes home, where families spend decades not knowing, where the absence only compounds over time into something almost too heavy to bear. She was found. She was healthy. She was given back to her family. But the Paisley Schultis case leaves behind questions that its resolution does not answer. Questions about how we protect children when the people hiding them are the same people legally responsible for them. Questions about the gap between what the law permits investigators to do and what a child's safety sometimes requires. Questions about what it means when a court-ordered custody arrangement fails to be enforced, not because the system was blind, but because the people inside that house were relentless in their deception, and relentlessness, for years on end, wore the system down. Police Chief Saugerties was candid about the frustration. His department had done everything they could within the bounds of what they were permitted to do. They had gone back again and again. They had been lied to their faces every single time. Without a warrant, there was only so far they could go. And getting a warrant requires evidence that people who are determined to obstruct can make extraordinarily difficult to obtain. The tip that finally broke it open, the specific, detailed, corroborated tip that gave investigators the probable cause they needed, came from somewhere. Saugerties did not disclose the source. He did not name who came forward, or what they knew, or why they decided to speak up when they did after 2 years of silence. But that tip is what made the warrant possible. And the warrant made everything else possible. Which means, in some fundamental way, that Paisley Schultis was found because someone decided they could not stay quiet any longer. Someone in or adjacent to that world, whatever world it was, looked at what was happening and decided it had gone on long enough. That person did the right thing. Whatever their reasons, whatever it cost them, they did the right thing, and a 6-year-old girl came home because of it. In the days after Paisley's discovery, Saugerties processed what had happened the way small towns always do, with a mixture of shock, reflection, and the particular kind of discomfort that comes from learning something troubling has been unfolding in a familiar place. Ariel Diedolf, who works at the Saugerties Public Library, remembered the moment she saw the name on a social media post. She recognized it immediately. Not because she knew the Schultis family personally, she didn't, but because the name had been part of the town's fabric for so long. "I knew it wasn't just someone from out of town that had showed up or moved up last year," she said. "It was a real local presence." That is the particular texture of what happened here. This was not an anonymous crime in an anonymous place. The Schultis family had roots going back centuries. The home on Fawn Road was a known address, in a community small enough that known carries real weight. And yet a child had been hidden there for over 2 years, and the community around it, for whatever combination of reasons, of loyalty or fear or simple ignorance of what was actually happening, had not produced the evidence needed to get her out sooner. Neighbors, when interviewed, said the family seemed ordinary, regular, not the kind of people you'd look at twice. "I'm just shocked," one neighbor told CBS New York, "because they seemed like regular people." That, too, is one of the oldest lessons in cases like this. The people who do the most harm to children are rarely monsters in any recognizable sense. They are people who seem ordinary, who have normal-looking houses on normal-looking roads in normal-looking towns, who speak plainly and look police officers in the eye and say, without flinching, that they have not seen the child in question since she went missing. What is on the inside and what is under the staircase, that is where the truth lives. February 14th, 2022, Valentine's Day. A detective shines a flashlight into a gap in a wooden staircase and sees a blanket. He could have kept walking. He could have filed a report saying the search had been thorough, that nothing had been found, that the family at 35 Fawn Road was again claiming ignorance. That would have been the easier thing. It would have fit the pattern of every previous visit. Instead, he called for a Halligan tool and started pulling stairs apart. And there, behind the wood and the darkness, and 2.5 years of carefully maintained lies, were a pair of little feet. Paisley Schultis is alive. She is growing up. She is learning the things she was not permitted to learn during the years she was hidden. And the road ahead of her is long and complicated, and hers, which is the most important part. Whatever was taken from her, she still has that. She has time. She has the chance to build a life on top of what she has already survived. That is not nothing. In a story full of darkness, it is everything. But it asks something of the rest of us too. Stories like this one don't exist in isolation. Children like Paisley are not rare anomalies. They are the visible edge of a system that strains constantly against the limits of what it can do, against legal constraints, against family silence, against the extraordinary capacity of determined people to conceal what they most want hidden. What protects children in those gaps is not any system, not any law, not any piece of legislation. It is people. It is the person who finally decides to make a call. The tip that came in on February 14th, 2022, after 2.5 years of silence, someone gave that tip. Someone knew. Someone decided that what they knew was more important than whatever it cost them to say it. That is where it always comes down to, in the end. If you see something, say something. And I know that phrase has been said so many times it barely registers anymore. But Paisley Schultis is the reason it has to keep being said. Someone knew, someone spoke, and a little girl came home. Before we close, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from today. And tell me what part of this story hit you hardest. Because I read every single one, and this community, the people who show up week after week to bear witness to these stories, you are the reason this work is worth doing. Like, share, subscribe, and hold your people close tonight. Until next time.